There's a light between, an energy unseen, a connection so profound, like a flowing stream. It whispers in the silence, guiding our way, intuition growing stronger with each passing day. The light between, it's a force to behold, unveiling truths untold, breaking through the mold. Intuition rising like a symphony in tune. The light between, it's a bond that won't remove.
Welcome to the Light Between podcast, where we embrace the divine love, light, and cosmic laws, recognizing us as co-creative agents in the mystical evolution of the divine. Unlike other shows on spiritual growth, The Light Between ignites heartfelt, my dear soul, love letters, intuitive healing insights, and empowering prompts that unlock your soul contract. When you no longer judge your inner critic and meet it with warmth, you can shift the perspective and power of the part of your shadow that is talking and the part of ourselves that is answering. I invite you to initiate your personal rite of passage in reconnecting with your innate power and intuition. Head over to the Light Between newsletter to stay on track with your highest timeline through next era resources and holographic psychic readings.
Let the light between, an energy unseen, connection so profound like a flowing stream.
So today's topic in the Light Between podcast is grief, because we've all been feeling it. There's no way to tiptoe around it. And I wanted to bring some different perspectives that not only I grasped in my time in the records, but also just based on my trauma-informed clinical experience around grief and working with clients. So let's dig in. So grief, oh man, it is a profound topic that affects all of us at some point in our life. And when we look at grief and spirituality, grief is more than just this reaction to loss. It is so deeply personal for each and every one of us. And it intertwines with our emotional, our physical, and spiritual well-being. And if we look at how it impacts our brains, we can start to really look at the perspective of not being so hard on ourselves, understanding the connection to grief through compassion. And so I want to start with the brain's role in grief. So when we look at pain, whether it's physical or emotional, it is very deeply connected to how the brain is wired. And the chronic pain that you may feel, whether it is emotionally or physically, doesn't just reside in one place. It is an entire network region that is working together. So when we are in pain and when it takes hold, we are stuck in overdrive. And this happens because the brain amplifies the signal. We talk about this if we go back to even the endocannabinoid system and CBD or THC, and why the CBD is able to tap into the CB2 receptors and uses that amplified signaling to the neurology to calm down in all of the receptor sites. Now, grief works similarly when it is physical because our brains are processing the loss very deeply. And this describes this state of isolation that often accompanies grief. And so when this happens, the limbic system is triggered by grief, which governs the emotions, goes into overdrive and disrupts the connection with our cortex in the brain. And this is the area, my friends, that handles calm, well thought out, rational thoughts. So right off the bat, if we are in pain physically or emotionally, the brain and the cortex go offline. It disconnects and makes it harder for us to really think clearly and feel balance. So In respects to the topic of grief, I wanted to top off the conversation around how our brain gets hijacked and how it deactivates. And so it gets stuck in that on position, which then strains the neurons and it wears the neurons down, hence our emotional and our physical body. When we look at our society right now, we look at what we've all been through in the last 6 years. And if you feel like I do, and one of the questions I brought into the records is, what are the elements of our systemic consciousness that makes us feel so grieved? And how, as a society, can we not overhype, over high vibe, really take this time to slow down and understand the impact of grief? Pain and grief are very much experienced in isolation. And isolation then is another fire starter that intensifies these patterns that again alter the brain. To find equilibrium is very hard when you're in isolation. So it's really crucial to recognize that if we are a society of consciousness, unsupported, not getting personal touch, not being seen or heard, our brain starts to unwire versus rewire for healing. And this is where the power of resonance comes in. This is where the holographic readings that I do, where we see where the emotions are hijacked. We tap into the neurology, and then through my psychic scene, I can see where the chakras are imbalanced, where we can get the circuitry of energy moving again, which is crucial. And resonance is what does that. Being seen is what does that. And resonance to me, and how I'm weaving it through the language and how I use language in my oracle deck, to the podcast, to every single time that I use the power of resonance. And it is the most powerful tool for addressing pain and grief because it creates the empathy and the connection in the nervous system, with the brain, and with self. So when we're tuning into our body's emotions, we literally can soothe the nervous system, asking questions as simple as this: what do you need right now to feel safe? Or what are you carrying right now that I sense is so heavy on your heart? It is so simple and it helps us connect. So the other aspect here is talking about the grief journey. Now, grief extends far beyond death. It is triggered by any loss and any emotional disconnection. So when we're understanding this, it helps us navigate the various stages. And so we understand, and if you haven't heard of the stages, there's actually more than this, but I'll kind of top off the structure of first being denial. And this is going to manifest as numbness. It's acknowledging the loss, but struggling to process it. Next, we have the phase of anger. And this can surface past grievances at any point in time, whether it's a person or it is something societal that we're all experiencing of this old world, but we still haven't fully manifested the new. So after anger, we have bargaining. And this is where the guilt turns on. We have reflection on what could have been done differently. But I'm telling you, my friends, bargaining does nothing. Bargaining with your spirit guides, bargaining with Jesus, bargaining with God. The next phase is depression, which is absolutely normal, and then acceptance. And what's interesting about acceptance, as I was dialoguing with my girlfriend all weekend, is sometimes acceptance through the grief process is being fucking tired of being tired and just being done with the situation. And when your emotional roller coaster brings you to a point where you are forced to no longer want to carry it and you release it, That is one of the most beautiful places that you can be in this compassionate journey of grief. So next I want to talk about, which brings us to societal grief, where we're at in this game of consciousness, the psyche, the soul, and the wounding. So if we look at our culture, we often undervalue, let's call it spiritual direction, but we also ignore spiritual crises. And anything that disrupts productivity or costs money is deemed inaccessible. However, spiritual crises, they are real and they need acknowledgement. And in the 1960s, we were introduced to this new terminology called the psyche, the soul. And people began asking questions like, what do I need internally? And these questions previously confined to what we would call them in monk mode, whether it's in a monastery or some spiritual retreat. What happened in the 60s is it started to lead to a decade of revolution as people explored self-development and its impact on our lives, its impact on our archetypal lives, and impacting, obviously, our future. So we fool ourselves by calling our arrogance intellectual. Wealth fuels this arrogance, and it creates a terrible combination of abundance, of arrogance, and unreasonable. And the unreasonable comes around what we are watching in the destruction of a global, hierarchical power over and power under structure. And this started to come into the 60s. It became very much of the psyche and the soul started to navel gaze and kind of self-consume. And then we started to bring in the intellectual. And the intellectual is usually where the wealth flows. And so what has happened is there's this blending of this new age movement that has also created destructive forces by focusing on quote unquote spiritual awakening that is actually just another plasticity placed over society's lack of spiritual commitment and wisdom. And we have been caught up in an elitist world for a very long time. And we have cut ourselves short of grieving what is accessible to our soul, what is accessible to each other, and how we view each other, how we love each other, how we do not judge each other, how we listen to each other, and how we don't listen to each other. We have lost this little beautiful emotional connection. Now, I'm not blaming anybody, but I'm looking at the different phases of consciousness and how this specific one is dying away. And we're grieving what was taken and also finding our step with 2 feet on the ground again. And so when we look at grief stages, they're not linear. Everyone experiences them uniquely. It's essential to understand them. And it's so essential to allow yourself grace. And so in a personal experience, I've been going through some teeth trauma, and it is greatly triggered trauma and grief. And it's highlighting that even seemingly minor events to somebody else can trigger profound emotional stress in all of us. So as you walk around, especially during this time of collective transition, collective grief, where we're surrounded by similar experiences in just different ways, to really understand that these negative encounters can leave us feeling completely depleted. And we counteract this by walking breathing and deeply discharging from what was and what currently is these, what I call psychic free radicals. And these psychic free radicals are basically a global infrastructure that is releasing suppressed anger from childhood, suppressed anger that now is in adulthood, and that manifests physically, energetically. And this is where those psychic free radicals, for relief, must demand expression. And so I say that to say, express what you're feeling, say it, dance it out, walk it out. Your guides, your angels are there to support you in the process. And for me, when I go into the Akashic records or I spend time in prayer with my guides, and they are so benevolent, they're never judging. And if you ever feel like you're in contact with an angel or a beloved etheric realm, they will never judge you. So as we close it up, I want to understand that what all of us to understand that depression and grief are deeply connected, that depression can arise in a response to unresolved grief, and it immobilizes us. So what can you do to start to look at the critical thoughts, the deep sense of loneliness, both which isolates us and also severs us from our sense of purpose and vitality, and to really look at the patterns of depression. And I also want to give you hope because there is a physical manifestation that involves your critical default mode network in the brain. And so when we are in this stream of consciousness of self-criticism, it's going on to a hopelessness feedback loop. And so this then goes back to the panic and loneliness. So again, leaving our souls and our hearts stranded just continues to repeat this global consciousness situation that I believe for the first time in history at a global level is starting a phase of self-awareness and healing. And I want you to know, if you need any support, I am here for you. I am here for it. The holographic readings are a beautiful way to understand where the unconscious contract came from that blocks healing. Because healing, honestly, my friends, whether it's self-blame, self-hate, or hate of another person or societal spectrum that you don't agree with, that just triggers our grief and our pain underneath it all. So I want to encourage you to introduce self-warmth to self. Practices like movement and reflection through movement are super helpful. And it creates that pathway so the brain can start to poke through to more clarity and understand that you're giving itself support. I do a lot of time traveling, whether it's in hypnosis or in the holographic reading of taking a look at isolation and loss, and then offering a way to hold those experiences with kindness. Because that, again, going back to the brain, activates the care circuit, the play circuit, and that's what starts to restore the balance in the nervous system by improving the emotional connection. So when it comes to the finalization of grief and depression and what I call sacred contracts, they are unconscious. And so the unconscious contracts that are hidden in our grief are something that help us cope for a time, and most of the time formed in childhood. So these vows might include avoiding hope to prevent a heartbreak. It may be rejecting moving forward to resist external pressure. There are all different types of vows that we make. And when we uncover the contract, it starts with identifying the origin. So, some questions to explore around this are: what promise was made around this sense of depression or grief, and who was it to? And was it created to protect and honor or save someone else at your cost? And is this contract still needed? And can it be released with love and compassion? And so when we release these vows, it's very subtle, but it starts to allow energetic movement, emotional freedom, and it starts to reduce that grief or depression locked into the brain's mechanism. So I want to send you so much love in this topic, a little bit of understanding the neuroscience and the journey out of this immobilization. But it does take self accompaniment because we cannot heal our grief alone. It also takes self forgiveness and compassion in when you are reflecting. So, one of the things that I do, whether I'm in the records or working through things, is to really extract, to be the observer, to be the witness. And when you get to that point, you just step into a place of taking responsibility. And I'm telling you right now, a lot of this grief is coming from power over and power under structures. Power over in government, thinking that they can do something for us, but they haven't. And power under, perhaps in a church, thinking that you have to pray to someone to get through to God, which is also false. Power with is me looking at you saying, you are an equal to me and I am an equal to you. And I can be in warmth and resonance with you and your grief and depression. No words needing to be said. And power within is for me to understand that I can be honest with myself and move into self compassion and self accompaniment to help nourish the brain, to reconnect the balance, to reconnect with joy, and rediscover the potential for our meaningful lives. So, I want to thank you for joining me on this journey through different perspectives of grief and spirituality today. There's so many dynamic views of grief, and there's so many dynamic views of even taking it to another level, talking about past lives and those that have lost. And so when we really zoom out and we become the observer, we see this on a global consciousness level. I honestly could not be in more celebration that feeling this solidarity in this journey as we each seek the deeper understanding for personal clarity and where we're at in our lives. I have never been more hopeful. And the psychic visions that I have been given of the future, I don't know how we're going to get there, but I promise you it is rich. So when what you've been doing feels too surface, too generic, and you're ready to get specific, to get personal, to get practical, when you feel alone in those depths of your experience and want to connect, this is where we do the spiritual deep dive. This is where we look at the configuration of the brain and how it works. And that, as simple as self-compassion, is the first connection to put the brain back online. If you can just give an ounce self-compassion in whatever way you know how, in this web of connection that we are all in this global massive shift of consciousness that we are going through. I want to send you all in my love, and please acknowledge where you're at. Explore professional support, somatics, or trauma-informed care. If you're interested in getting to the deep-rooted connections between pain, grief, and unconscious contracts, I would love to be of service and support you. So, all my love, all my compassion, connection, and care sending your way as we acknowledge this time, as we all move through the resonance and into the relief We'll see you on the next Light Between episode.
The light between an energy unseen, a connection so profound like a flowing stream. It whispers in the silence, guiding our way. Intuition growing stronger with each passing day. The light between is a force to behold, unveiling truths untold, breaking through the mold. Intuition rising like a symphony in tune. The light between, it's a bond that won't remove. In the spaces between words, in the moments of pause, the light between it aligns the universal laws. It speaks in whispers in the depths of your soul, guiding you forward, making you whole. The light between, it's a force to behold, unveiling truths untold, breaking through the mold. Intuition rising like a symphony in tune. Let the light guide you, let intuition lead. In the dance of life you'll find what we need. The light between, an eternal flame, igniting your path, never the same. The light between, a sacred bond, illuminates the path we're on. Intuition blossoms, spirits entwine. The light between.